Hi there. This is the last session before lunch. So you are going to listen. The next session after lunch is usually really people are really tired. It's all about theoretical design methodology based on examples. So let me see who is going to listen about theoretical methodology. Okay, a lot of you. Our speakers is Francisco Franco. Don't try to put this name into Google because you will be a little bit surprised by the results. Always at Android in the end. And Spradlin. Please give him nice welcome.
All right, hey everyone. Like he said, I'm Spradlin. I work at Touch Lab based in New York City, where I help companies from startups all the way to public services like Link NYC build great Android experiences with good design as a foundational principle. And I'll let Francisco introduce himself.
Hello everyone, my name is Francisco Franco and I'm an independent developer. I have many Android apps and I work for myself and for no one else. And I'm here to help present this new design methodology. I was the developer that implemented this methodology, so I hope you like it.
All right, so today we're going to talk about mutative design, building and experiencing mutation with Selene. So first of all, has anybody here heard about mutative design or read about it at all? Okay, awesome. A few people actually have. Cool. For everybody that hasn't, we'll just start off with some basics and go over quickly what mutative design actually is. First, some terms. So Project Phoebe is a project that I started to kind of deal with mutative design and explore some of the questions that come up with this new methodology. It's a first open source step towards mutative design, so that includes things like design files, code, articles about it, things like that. And mutative design itself is basically a theoretical design methodology that would allow interfaces and experiences to be born, evolved with user realities. So what is reality? I think that's probably a question for another talk, but reality in this context is essentially, in terms of user reality, things that impact the way a user uses their device or apps. So things like physical ability, vision, lighting, data access, things like that. So before we go any further, why mutate, and does this actually make sense as a thing to pursue? I think so. I'll tell a quick story. A few months ago, I met a woman who has MS, and her primary phone was a landline phone, a cordless handset with regular buttons. And so it was difficult to work that because obviously landline phones don't have as many affordances for accessibility as mobile devices. So I have a lot of test devices lying around, so I thought about the Moto X. It doesn't take any physical pressure to turn on the screen, and it also has affordances for things like voice actions, so the user doesn't have to touch the device a lot to do many things. So that helped a lot, but still inside of third-party apps, there were touch targets and actions and things like that that were still hard to do because of limited physical ability. So that just highlighted for me something that I've been thinking about since I started Project Phoebe, which is that accessibility is something that's too often either left behind or partially implemented or implemented in a way that sacrifices other parts of the experience. So I started thinking, what if there was a way that the interface could adapt for these users without compromise while not sacrificing parts of the interface for other users? So in terms of methodology, basically user reality is called characteristics, so things that are unchanging about the user, things like vision level and physical ability and things like that. And then extra characteristic states would be things like lighting conditions, speed, orientation, things that change on an ongoing basis. And then when you begin to design for mutative design, you begin with the mother design, which is kind of the archetypal state. A user might not ever see the mother design. It's kind of the design for the interface before any mutation begins. And then starter states would be the first state that the user sees. So as soon as they use the app, it tries to account for as many of these characteristics as it can, and then it will continue mutating based on other characteristics it learns or user behavior. So we're going to walk through just a couple of quick examples that I set up with the original post on Project Phoebe of how mutation might look in real interfaces. So this first one is just a basic contacts app. You have a search bar, your carousel of favorite or recent contacts, a list of other contacts, and then a floating action button for creating new contacts. It's pretty simple. So the test user, I randomized 2 users based on a list of characteristics. So the first randomized user is an adult who has full data access, full physical ability, all of that, but has low vision. So the starter state for something like that might look like this. And what we've done here is basically just increase the size of icons and enhanced the contrast. Previously, the blue-gray color in the toolbar had a contrast ratio of about 3.5 to 1 with the white elements on the page, which is okay, but not really up to enhanced contrast for low vision. So this actually bumps it up to 7 to 1, just to make sure that users can differentiate elements in text. And then what would happen from here? Like I said, we might mutate based on user behavior. So for instance, if we see that the user is kind of lingering on this page, swiping around aimlessly, maybe they're not quite sure what to do, then it could mutate to highlight some of the main sections of the screen, indicate actions that the user can take, and just help them figure out what to do next. Our second user is a toddler who is familiar with technology. One of the characteristics is familiarity or exposure to technology, and that, of course, is relative to your age. But they don't have data access, but they do have full physical input. They're sighted, not colorblind, etc. So this just shows a quick animation of how we might change to the starter state for this user. One of the questions that I thought of when I was designing this was, why would a toddler be using a contacts app? But the great thing about mutative design is that you actually don't need an answer to that question, because the interface would just know to adapt on its own. So that's what the starter state looks like for this. Basically, the floating action button is larger. List items are also spaced farther apart because small children are more prone toward fast and imprecise taps on the screen. And then as the user ages and progresses, the design would also progress, and it would actually get closer to the mother design as the user becomes more accustomed to the gestures and kind of actions that you do on a mobile device. So probably a lot of you in the room have thought about this already as I've been talking, but there's some fundamental doubts about mutative design, right? So it sounds great on paper, but there's still some problems to figure out if we actually want to pursue this. One of them is user confidence, and that's a really big one since, when a user experiences an interface, they build up things like a mental model of how things are organized and how they work. They get muscle memory for certain actions, things like that. So we don't want mutations to happen all at once and kind of like move buttons or switch around elements in a way that would confuse the user. So it's important to go gradually. Accounting for everything is another concern. So accounting for all of these realities, how do we know? And it's easy to kind of say, machine learning and just be done with it and just write that off as belonging to machine learning's responsibility. But I think a good starting point for now is just to kind of have a comprehensive list of realities that we know about, such as vision, physical ability, things like that, and then start from there by accounting for those things. And then tough decisions about when to mutate. So if, for example, if you have a user who is tapping outside of a certain tap target very often, then do we move the button or do we increase its size? And if so, how far can that be pushed until it's actually hindering the rest of the interface? And then also technical limitations, which Francisco will address.
Okay, so technical limitations. So basically, there's nothing out there to do this. So as a developer, you kind of have to think outside of the box and just invent a little bit and hope your designer just doesn't build anything too complicated for you, because this by itself, it's a challenge. There's no APIs, there's no guidelines, there's nothing. So it's kind of harsh. So, but I think we are going to talk about it afterwards in the next slide. And I guess...
Yeah. So now we're getting back to Selene, which Selene is the first open source mutative sample app. If you guys do want to check out the code for just some simple mutations. And Francisco will talk a little bit about building the mutations.
Yeah, as I was telling you about, there's no API, there's no examples, no best practices. and we have to choose what to implement and how. So go ahead. So
Right. So one of the first things that we implemented was an ephemeral change, like one of those extra characteristic states, which is the contrast mutation. And that basically reacts to light levels around the user, so ambient light for the device. And this is what that looks like. So essentially, as you move into brighter light, like sunlight, it will automatically darken the background of notes. Selene is a note-taking app, obviously. It will darken the background of notes to enhance contrast so you can keep reading them even outside.
okay, so developing the contrast mutation, how it works. So you know, every Android device has a lightning sensor at the front, I hope. And Android has a native API to get this value. So anyone, I think it exists since API 1, so there's no excuse to not make use of it. Then we get the value, and then we apply that value to the light value of each color. So you know each color has saturation, light, red, blue, green. So we just have like a magical algorithm and just scale things dynamically in the light value of the color based on the lighting value that comes from the sensor. So that was a challenge because as I said before, there's nothing like it. So we making it perfect, it was hard because either it changed too much or didn't change at all. And if it changes too much, then as Liam said, there's that muscle memory and you can be confused or angry because it's changing all the time. So it's a very nice challenge. So that was the approach here because it's easy to demo because you have lights changing all the time. It looks cool. Every time I demo the app, everyone is like, wow, this is really cool. And you can see it. So yeah, that was the approach. And developing for different Android devices. As you know, Samsungs, LGs, HTCs, they all have their different implementations of their sensors. Values can change. For example, I have an X-Bin Robin in my house, and I was testing this app, and the values that were coming from the sensor were really crazy. So it didn't work exactly like we hoped because we always test the app on our Nexus devices, and it was perfectly fine. So that's that. So you have to account for crazy things to happen sometime, I guess. So.
Right. And then, of course, on the other side, opposed to ephemeral mutations are long-term changes. So basically things that would transition slowly over time, like we demonstrated with those examples earlier. These are longer-term things, and it's important, like I said, to kind of not pull the rug out from underneath the user with mutations. And that means striking a balance with the mother design. So there are certain things, like the mental model of the app, that shouldn't change through mutation, that you establish from the base design, and then elements mutate themselves from there. And then to get the mutations working in Selene, there's a concept that we're calling Gaia, which basically positions mutative design as kind of a platform rather than something that every app would have to figure out by itself. And the reason for this is just that mutation must happen automatically. So if we, as designers and developers, are kind of deciding what kind of mutation should happen and exactly when they should happen, then it's still a manual process, and we're not really solving the problem that mutative design wants to solve, which is designing for averages rather than for every single user. So basically, mutation just has to happen automatically, or else it's kind of pointless. In the bright and magical future, how Gaia would work is that it would basically be a piece embedded in the framework that would be a broker of information about mutations. It would contain instructions for elements to mutate in certain ways, and then would also get information back from the apps about the success rate of those mutations. So if, for example, going back to our button example, if we do decide to mutate the button by increasing its size, then Gaia would see, over time, do the statistics work out that the user is tapping the button more successfully? If so, that would help speed up successful mutations in the future by giving that information to more apps. But that's not how it works in Selene, since we don't quite have the feasible technical ability to get that deep into the system just yet. So I'll let Franco explain.
You don't. Maybe I do.
Maybe.
So Gaia is just, I don't know if you are programmers or developers, but Gaia is just a simple class. And I use a simple event bus and then I register the views to be like embedded in Gaia. So it's like Gaia multiplies for each view, and I just have like subscribe methods that just go through the changes that we want to present, and then it just works because everything is registered in Gaia and so forth. So it's really simple.
And so, of course, having a system like Gaia, like I said, you have some considerations to make at the beginning of the design process about how these things will mutate and kind of planning for those mutations. So I'm just going to walk through how we kind of planned out the contrast mutation and what we learned from that, essentially. So this is the mother palette for Selene. It represents every color that we started out with for the app, for notes, text, buttons, all of these things. And then we had to figure out, so we want to enhance contrast when the user moves into bright light so they can keep reading. But we had to figure out the best way to do that. And so what we found is essentially when you move into sunlight or bright light, every color on a digital display trends towards white. So for instance, if you have black text on a white background, in sunlight that will look like gray text on a white background. Likewise, gray text will turn to light gray text. If you have white text on a gray background, of course it'll look like white text on a light gray background. But if you have white text on a black background, it will look like white text on a gray background. So basically all of that is to say that since white is the brightest color you can get, it gives you the best chance for contrast if you use white text on a dark background. So we should just make all of the notes go to black when you get to sunlight, right? But we couldn't really do that because that kind of defeats the purpose of the palette. So the purpose of the palette is basically so users can visually distinguish what types of notes they've written based on the color. So we had to find a balance kind of between darkening the background color enough so that it's readable in sunlight while still not losing those distinct colors that we started out with. And then another option, something that we explored in Selene, is mutation is onboarding. So I'm a believer that the best onboarding is no onboarding because I like kind of organic user experiences where they're able to figure out the things that they want to do in an app and successfully get to those goals by themselves. But there are still times when we need to educate the user about new features or things that they might not know about yet. So the way we handled this in Selene is essentially if the user is lingering on this new note page, they haven't created a note, maybe they're swiping around, the floating action button will visibly transform with an animation into this full width button that says new note, which is obviously a much more explicit label. So that just creates like a really strong visual connection for the user that that button means that action. And then once they successfully create a note, it'll go back to how it was before. Of course, this sort of thing kind of opens the door, it kind of highlights a point about dark patterns. So if we start doing custom mutations for things like onboarding, of course, that could be used for such evil purposes as exploiting muscle memory to promote a new feature, making custom mutations to tell users to do a certain thing when it's not in their best interest, etc. So I think the next step for mutation from a design perspective will be establishing some best practices for the ways that things should change and kind of defining those and how they'll interact with the user. And until then, you can check out the beta app on the Play Store at selene.phoebe.xyz. You can check out the source code, including all the design files for everything you've seen here and more at source.phoebe, the community on Google+, or you can just read about it at hello.phoebe.xyz.
So don't forget the app has some bugs, but it's open source.
Yeah.
So if you want to fix something, just do pull requests or just post on our GitHub issues list, and we'll probably fix it. But it's a demo. But we can actually use it as a note-taking app. But it's impossible to beat Google Keep. That's not our goal. But
right.
yeah.
And so, basically the bottom line is just getting more people involved with mutative design and hopefully understanding what its goals are and getting on board with interfaces that can be built to accommodate every single user and not just an average of your users. And that's it.
Thank you, guys. You mentioned the mother palette for the application, and right. I had the feeling that it's like trying to design an app that will works for me and for my mother, which does the trick.
Yeah, that's exactly
that was my feeling. And there are certain apps that really need some such customization, and it's just the banking apps, for instance, came to my mind, that the broad of the user is really, really big, and then you really need some people with completely different experiences using it. And the question is, from your perspective, how much of things like that should the operating system should take care of, and how much it should be built in the app itself? Because we do have accessibility pane in settings in Android. You have to do it manually, by the way, as you know. So it's quite open question, but I'm just curious.
I think ideally in the future, as much as possible should be mutative. If we achieve it in the right way, then most mutations wouldn't really even be noticed by the user necessarily. They would just have an experience of being able to use the app more successfully. And it wouldn't seem like every time I go into this app, something's different. It would just seem like this is kind of getting better over time. So I think as much as possible.
Well, but as a developer, it's easy to just add settings because you have users asking, do this, do that. And it's very easy for us to add more options, give it more options, and users ask us for options. But that's not always the right answer, because more options give you more complexity. But if you do the job, as we present here, if you do the job beforehand and actually have the app adapt to you, you don't need settings, or that's the goal.
Maybe configuration files like on Linux.
Right. And I think settings is actually a really good example where mutative design could come in handy because it would accommodate not just, you wouldn't just have a straight list of all these options. You would have something that's categorized more intelligently to what you usually are trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, thank you guys for sharing this. I think this is extremely exciting, innovative, and really forward-thinking. So amazing job. I have two questions. So I'm trying to think of how I can try to introduce this concept into my own design team and trying to get ahead of some things that they may say in response, given this change. Nobody likes change. So the first question is, for those who believe that we know the right thing that somebody should do, and or like, we should come up with a consistent design and it shouldn't change, then our design will be scattered. What are some things that, we can say to help debunk that thought? And then my second question is, at what level should this customization reach? Is it only visual design in the way that people touch certain tap targets, or does it go into actions that they lead into, where it's like if somebody logs into this app, we know that they like to go here first instead of here, and then it allows the interaction to lead them there, versus another person who checks this other thing first, and then we lead them there most primarily. So just wanted to get your thoughts on those two topics.
Right. So to the second one, I think that, the second approach would probably be ideal. Obviously, like once we do have more of a platform for mutation of visual design elements, the things that you're talking about, like customizing your own apps interactions, would be something more custom. But I think that would take extra considerations about like what's actually best for the user. So more data as always. But to your first question, I think like mutative design is still kind of out there as an idea, so it's still kind of like a crazy thing to bring up, I guess. But I would just say, like, the strongest case for me again is accessibility, because it's something that's so often left behind. But otherwise, just making the point that we can do better than the process that we're using now, right? So it can be a better experience for all users. So the faster that we work on that, the better.
I think there's a easier answer. It's use common sense. I think I know every person has a different common sense, but at the end of the day, I think what feels right, you should go with it, and not just change for changing, but using common sense. As a developer, I think like that. If I overthink too much, maybe something is wrong, or the user is asking different things, or the designer is asking too much. Using common sense works most of the time.
I would also maybe like investigate what the meaning of consistent is in the context, because I would say just consistency for its own sake probably doesn't have a lot of weight. But if we're talking about a user consistently having a good and successful experience in your app, then you can accomplish that with mutative design and not just by having the interface stay as it is.
Okay, so my question is more like open thought or an idea for you guys. Maybe another step is to put a context of user when he's using the app. Like, is it in public transport? Maybe is he running? Maybe he's in the car. Such things. Maybe the app should also transform, mutate according to such conditions. Maybe
Yeah.
weather in some cases as well. Maybe. I have no idea, but the concept is great, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree totally. The more, those would be like extra characteristic states that are kind of changing on the fly all the time. But yeah, I think that those should be addressed as well.
Okay, thanks.
Hi. By the way, I like the idea how you reacted for Michał's thoughts. Hey, here I am. Like you look like, oh, it's amazing, and you look like, oh my God, how to implement that?
Yes, most of the times the worst for me is it's not about mutative design, but it gives me like crazy animations, and I don't know if you know, but animations on Android are like.
Yeah, that's a good summary of kind of how we work together. I propose something insane, and then Franco figures it out eventually.
He says, "I have an idea." When he says that.
Okay, guys, I have a question from your experience, from your perspective, from rather technical side. What's the multiplier in terms of the time spent on this project? If you could compare, like you should implement this just a simple Node app, right? And then you would like to implement this with this mutative design. What's the multiplier? How longer it will take you to implement that?
Well, it's always
Double, triple.
Well, for us in this case, the app didn't exist, so it was easier for me to think beforehand before starting to. And I'm not a person that plans too much, but in this case, I planned a little bit. We discussed a couple of things beforehand, and things just happened. I just found a way myself, like common sense. But I think even if you already have an app, if you use something like Gaia, like that we are using right here, you don't have to change any code, any existing code. Just build, in this case, just a class with your methods that are subscribing to certain events. In this case, I'm using an event bus for that. You just add instead of changing your code. So in this case, you can see the source code. I'm just doing a new Gaia and I pass something, and I register and I unregister when that node doesn't exist anymore, or the activity is destroyed. But I don't think it's a multiplayer thing. It's more as taking the time to understand what you already have and how best you can achieve a mutation. But you don't need to change your existing code.
Right.
I think so.
And I think it'll be different, like these early stages before mutative design has reached the point where it's more of a platform that you can just tap into at the system level. Right now, obviously, it'll take more time depending on what mutations you want to do, but in the future, hopefully that will decrease as more people are working on it.
I think you spend more time just figuring out which interactions you don't want to do because it will break something. We had a thought early on to use the accelerometer, the gyroscope, and our floating action button would change sides if we tilt the phone. But it's cool, it's mutative. Imagine you're like doing this and you want to use your left thumb or instead of the right thumb and vice versa. But at the end, if things are changing too much, your muscle memory will crash and you'll be, oh, I hate this, and you'll install the app and you won't install it again. So I think you waste more time just thinking about these cases and make sure you go to the right ones instead of just doing stuff, like I was saying, just to do, which is the wrong way.
Next question is here, then here, and then here. But we got like still 15 minutes for Q&A. That's good.
So most recently, both Google and Apple released something called night mode and night shift. Basically, at least with Google, is that like my app can change the theme during the day. I think the different theme in the evening. So my question is it can I call it a poor man's mutative design, or is it too little?
No, I don't think it's too little at all. I think that's one. It's an example of one kind of ephemeral state itself. Ideally, it would be more automated in the future and not tied to a user manually going to a setting. But yeah, I think it is an example.
But for example, in that case, as a developer, I haven't even tested that functionality because I would have to change all my themes, because I already had this set up on our apps. And using something like Mutative Design, you don't actually have to change what you already have. This is in my perspective. So in your case, you're saying maybe it's mutative design, but you have probably to break something else and fix it and change it. So I think so, at least.
Okay, so next question. You've shown some examples of different types of mutative design, and some of them are automatically applied, like night mode in case of Google Apple, or the brightness adjustment. But some of those mutative design changes are based on who the user is. So like visual impaired person or other kind of disabilities. The question is like, are you thinking about automatically detecting some kind of user characteristics like that, or something that you have to set in settings? How to do it in the best way, because it's kind of difficult to go through every app and set it up and configure it for this particular person. What are your thoughts about that?
Right. So like I said, mutation has to happen automatically, right? So if you go to hello.phoebe.xyz and read the post, there's a whole section about kind of meeting the user. And ideally, that would happen invisibly. So one of the examples is like if you do have a first run process, or if the system has a first run process, then you can learn a lot from that based on things like how long it takes the user to read a screen, where they're touching the screen in relation to like visual touch targets, things like that. So there are invisible ways that you can kind of intuit some of that information about the user.
For example, the age, it's kind of hard to do. Maybe, I don't know, maybe there's something reading your Google Plus profile and you can read your birthday date, or there's probably some field somewhere using Google Sign In that you can figure it out.
Cookies from home.
Cookies?
From home.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
There's probably bazillion different ways to figure out something.
And one of the examples that someone posted in the community that was cool was kind of a floating action button that you swipe to bring up other actions. And they actually looked at the swipe arc of the user's thumb and were able to tell whether they were left or right-handed, which then told the app to display text labels on the left or right side, depending on which hand the user was using.
He wanted me to do that, and I told him, forget it.
Also, you could also try to recognize the length of the thumb to recognize the age.
Good luck.
Next question there.
Hello. Yeah. My question was similar to that one. I was like, how would you identify a novice user compared with an advanced user? I know it's completely subjective on the type of app, but I just wanted some sort of best practice recommendations that you could sort of shout out to.
Sure. Since we're so early in the process, I'm hoping the next step will be to kind of establish some baseline best practices and kind of publish those for everyone to see. But I would say that you could intuit things like exposure to technology or something like that based on other factors. So like I said, the speed that it takes them to read a text-based screen, the way that they're touching things like that could probably help you kind of get close to an answer on that.
That's easy. For example, a 3-year-old or 4-year-old will just tap into things crazy. If you're a 70-year-old or 80, like my grandfather's, it'll probably take a while and reads and think, what's happening here? So I know it's guessing, you're guessing, but there's probably some patterns that you can follow and do some magic, I think.
Right, and I think as we get closer to the point where mutative design is a platform, this will become easier because, for example, when I was doing research for the original post on Phoebe, I talked to a lot of people with kids about how they interact with mobile devices, and it turned out that touch screens, like capacitive touch screens, are actually a much more intuitive experience for kids than a mouse pointer, which I thought was crazy because growing up myself, I would have no idea. So things like that change over time, and once Gaia is an actual platform, it would learn that on its own and just kind of know that for you.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Thanks.